Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our VP debate stream. Although, of course, we have so much more news that we have here in the show. Luckily, we have the great Counterpoints team, Ryan Grimm and Emily Jasinski, here at the desk. I'm very happy to be back. I missed you guys very much, but you did a great job as I was traversing across the country for various different weddings. But we've got a great show today, Krystal. What do we have?
Yeah, so we are going to get to, of course, the vice presidential debate coverage. The one and only debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz will be really interesting to see how that matchup works out. But if I'm being totally honest with you, it's probably not the most important thing happening today, which is why we're going to lead the live stream.
The top five, maybe.
Maybe in the top five.
Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe.
It's on the bubble.
So we'll get to it. But we're going to start with what is the most consequential news, which is what's happening in the Middle East with Iran launching a barrage of missiles at Israel, Israel promising to respond as soon as tonight. So we'll break all of that down and what it means. In addition, there's huge domestic economic news, which actually you guys covered the looming port strike. And we're some of the only, I think that we might have been like the only news outlet that really paid attention to this before it happened.
Right.
Exactly. And so now the longshoremen are striking at East Coast ports, incredibly significant. Joe Biden has had to weigh in. Obviously, they're close to Election Day, and commerce is very important. The economy is very important. They also have quite a fiery leader of that union who's been very outspoken, so we want to get to that as well. And then, of course, we'll take a look at the very latest in terms of the polls and where things stand, how J.D. Vance and Tim Walz stack up favorability-wise, what all of us expect from this debate tonight, and whether or not it will be consequential, maybe, in a way that we don't expect. Probably not.
Probably
you
not.
Never know.
But yeah, it's
you never know.
Listen, famously have said debates don't matter, so maybe this one will also defy expectations.
To be fair, we've learned this year that you actually never know how much a debate can matter.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Until the first 10 minutes.
Right. So we'll find out.
Yeah.
We will find out tonight. I mean, very likely it will not move the race significantly, but let's all not forget this is the very last debate of this presidential cycle. This actually is the last national big flagship moment where you have any two of the candidates from either ticket on the stage together. So at the very least, that's going to be important, potentially policy-wise, especially we're going to hear from them on Iran. We do have a discount that we're running right now. Can we put that A1, please, up on the screen, guys, for all of our would-be premium subscribers? You can go ahead and get $15 off. You can sign up with the code BP24 at breakingpoints.com. Of course, we not only have exclusive election segments, Krystal and I's predictions for the election and all of that, that drops for our premium subscribers early, but you also get the ability to participate in the AMA. And if we have some time, perhaps we will answer some questions that are there on our premium stream. So go ahead and take advantage of that. As I said, breakingpoints.com, BP2024. So there we go. But with that, hardest pivot of all time, straight up massive war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
What is it?
I don't think it's hyperbolic to say, we are truly poised on the brink of a massive regional, if not larger, war. We can go ahead and put some images up on the screen here, not entirely unexpected, but still obviously dramatic and deeply disturbing. You had a barrage of missiles fired at Israel, appears to be at military sites within Israel across the entire country. We'll just keep this footage rolling. Some of those missiles, which were reportedly ballistic and hypersonic, some of them were, of course, shot down by the Israeli Iron Dome missile defense system. Some of them, though, were not.
You can see some of those.
You can see some of those impacting the ground. That may be the ones in Tel Aviv. I'm not sure. I know there were some in Tel Aviv, but really throughout the country. Still very much early hours in terms of assessing what the damage is. As far as we know, there was only one casualty. It was actually a Palestinian in the West Bank. And I believe the reporting I saw, and all of these things continue to be kind of murky, was that he was actually struck by the fallout from one of those Iron Dome interceptor missiles. So obviously, we've been tracking very closely this continued escalation and the continued provocations from Israel that led to this point, and also the continued abdication of duty from the Biden administration, which is incredibly consequential here. You have this in response to a number of actions, including the targeted assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran's capital city of Tehran. We've been kind of waiting for some sort of response there from Iran. They've been, I have to say, very, sort of cautious and measured and seem very much not to want to get pulled into a further escalation. And then, of course, you had the massive attacks on Hezbollah, both with the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, and then with the assassination of Nasrallah, along with the decimation using over 80 2,000-pound bombs of somewhere around 1,000 Lebanese people as well, quite a number of women and children among them. You now have the early phases of a ground invasion into Lebanon, so Iran saying that these strikes are in retaliation for those actions. The latest we know is that it appears the U.S., of course, standing strong with Israel. They have a right to defend themselves, all the things you would expect them to say. Kamala Harris came out and gave a big speech saying, everything you would expect her to say. Nothing off script there. And Israel threatening an aggressive response in reaction to this. And so, Ryan, I think we were joking, it's like gallows humor. This is like the least surprising October surprise of all time, because we have watched the way that Bibi has continued to want to escalate and expand this war. And that's no surprise. That's in his political interest. It's in his long-term ideological interest. And Joe Biden has said from the beginning that avoiding what you're seeing on your screen right now, that this was his primary goal with respect to Israel and Palestine. And yet through his refusal to ever say no at any juncture and do anything other than, leak to the oh my gosh, I'm so angry, I'm so upset, et cetera. This is the incredibly predictable, almost certain result of that inaction from the Biden administration.
Yeah, and we have so the IRGC put out a statement, which I think is really interesting if you parse it, where they say this was done, quote, in response to the assassination of martyr Hania, Syed Hassan Nasrallah, and Sadr Nifo Rashan, we targeted important targets. So because the IRGC waited to respond at the behest of the United States, Israel kind of got a twofer here, because they're responding at once to the assassination of Hania in Tehran, and then also to the assassination of their top officials in Beirut, plus of Nasrallah. But then they say, and this is the key detail, they say, if the Zionist regime responds to our attack, our next attacks will be more devastating. And they note in their statement that they targeted 3 military bases: Nevatim, which houses F-35 aircraft; Netzarim, which houses F-15 jets used in the assassination of Nasrallah; and Tel Nof base near Tel Aviv. So they were very clear, we're not going after civilian targets, we're going after military targets, and they explain why they went after the military targets. And then they say, basically, if you don't strike back, this is over. Like, we had to save face, you did all of these things to us, now we've done these things to you, we're even. The U.S. has responded by calling it a brazen attack and saying that Iran must be punished. Iran, the U.S. could come out and say, all right, you know what? You actually did blow up a guy in Tehran, and you actually did blow up their generals in Beirut.
Well, and they
responded.
Last time, reportedly, Biden urged Bibi to say, listen, you shot down their missiles.
Right.
Let's call it even.
Right.
And stop there. Now, obviously, it didn't stop there. But
it did, because that was April.
For a time.
So
for
we
a
haven't,
time.
Right.
Yes.
Well, let's be clear, though. In terms of the White House statement, so far and everything, I spent the entire day for, RIP myself, watching every government press conference, State Department, Pentagon, and all of this. Were you there?
I got dissed, no question.
Oh, interesting. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm sure he knew.
There were some other good questions that were asked.
The most important one to me was actually Jake Sullivan's statement, where in Jake Sullivan's statement, he said he saw it as an escalatory, a quote, significant escalation, and that we will work with Israel in their response. So tacitly, basically greenlighting this. We should not forget what happened last time. So yes, the White House did put out a statement and saying, hey, you guys shouldn't do anything. But a lot of people forget that the Israelis, remember, struck that air defense system that's right outside an Iranian nuclear site, which was actually very militarily significant. Because if I pair it with some of the statements that are coming out of the Israeli highest echelons, we are seeing open calls for a couple of things. One, to wipe out Iranian Iranian oil refineries. 2 is to wipe out Iranian nuclear facilities, which specifically that previous strike was like a warning. It's like, hey, we took out the air defense. We can come back here if we want to, just to show you. 3 is actually just straight up regime change. And I have been deeply concerned here because the most senior elements of the Israeli regime, all from people inside and outside the government. You know, I was watching MSNBC actually to see if Ehud Omer, who has criticized Bibi at points, to see what he would say. He was advocating for regime change in Iran. We have Naftali Bennett, the previous prime minister here, theoretically, who was in opposition. He has a long statement out. He says Israel has now the greatest opportunity in 50 years to change the face of the Middle East. The leadership, blah, 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 made a terrible mistake. He says we must now remove this terrible threat to our children's future, which can grant the Iranian people an opportunity to rise up and shake off the regime that tyrannizes its women and its daughters. So clearly now, regime change is like the uniparty decision here that has been arrived at the elites with Tel Aviv and at the top of the Israeli government. So when we combine that with what we previously saw from them, I don't think it is out of the question to say that we could see a full-on IDF bombing of major targets all across Iran, on top of a possible assassination of the Ayatollah Khomeini. So previously, I was watching some senior military officials, former IDF and others, who were on Fox News, and almost immediately after the strike, like minutes afterwards, they were saying, oh, well, the Ayatollah is now somebody that we could see here. So it is very, very possible that in the next week or so, we see an actual campaign of regime change that is potentially foisted or on Iran by Israel. But there's no question that any of us should have that this will not involve the United States. We would give them the weapons to do so. 24 interceptors were actually fired by U.S. Navy assets. I did the back
Plus
of the
some
napkin.
in the Iraq base, I think,
we are at $100 million for today, just today, in terms of how much it costs to shoot down that. The Iranians, remember, have some of the largest ballistic missile, I believe one of the largest stocks in the entire world. Quite cheap, and they've been preparing for this for quite a long time. Another big tell is that if you guys have seen, the Israelis keep saying this was a very successful operation. It's not a success if some of the missiles get in. It's a failure. If a missile strikes your military assets, that is a huge failure. Also, what would the number be if America didn't fire some 24 of those 180 out of the sky? I think we actually know what the answer is. And so when you start to put all of these together, really we actually saw part of the Israeli responses, they're like, we need to have deterrence restored. That's a tell, because they keep saying it was an ineffective attack. No, it's not an ineffective attack. It struck military targets inside of Israel. It didn't kill anyone, probably more by design. On the Iranian side.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this was intended to overwhelm the Iron Dome. That's the saturation ballistic missiles. When you do that, you're specifically trying to overwhelm the Iron Dome.
Yes.
So that's obviously what happened.
And that's another thing. There's Iron Dome, there's Arrow 3, and there's David Sling. So Iron Dome typically used for rockets. I believe the ballistic missile defense, Arrow 3, David Sling also was engaged. But anyways, I mean, and also, who wants to know who sells each of the parts of all three of those?
Go look at the stock market.
You're right. Where do you think all those come from? Every single one is from the United States. So we are fully going to be involved. And if you think that there's going to be an Israeli attempt to overthrow, how many people live in Iran? Tens of millions. A country of 10 million can try and have regime change in a country of tens of millions of people, massive, a traditional power center
if they can kill
in the
Khomeini,
Middle East. Right. Okay. But that's not actually, wouldn't wipe out this quote unquote the regime. If they want a full-on type of regime change, there's no question about who's actually going to be the person footing that bill. So we're in a very precarious moment. America is basically tacitly greenlighting an Israeli bombing of Iran, something Obama worked tirelessly in an office to try to prevent. I mean, this is really shocking.
I don't even think you can say tacitly when, tacitly backing it.
Right.
Based on the public comments and also based on the report that we got that Brett McGurk and others in the White House were privately encouraging the invasion and the attacks in Lebanon over the objections of the Department of Defense and the State Department. So they, have bought into the philosophy of Netanyahu, and how much Biden's involved in that or not at this point, who the hell knows?
That's what's terrifying.
But they have bought into the philosophy, first the escalate to de-escalate. How's that working out for you? But now I think that at least the key officials like Brett McGurk, who seem to be running the show, they have bought into this idea of this is our moment to remake the Middle East. This is our moment
to strike the nuclear,
to strike Iran, to diminish the influence of Iran in the region. And so I don't think it's tacit. I think it's an explicit support for continued spiraling escalation and Israeli, overwhelming response here.
To Saagar's point about what we were hearing immediately from some ex-military guys, people who are sort of in those orbits on Fox News and other channels, that was absolutely, this is the time. If ever there is a time to strike the Iranian missiles and nuclear program, it is now. There will not be a better opportunity. This is a time for regime change. It's a time for dramatic attacks on the nuclear program. This is it. You have to seize it. And what I find to be completely terrifying is the disagreement that we've seen in the administration when you have the Pentagon saying, and then you have the Biden administration. We still don't know to what extent the president of the United States, who was so incapacitated that his own party didn't think that he could run on the ticket after millions of people had voted for him and he had been nominated. He's that incapacitated. And right now we're engaged in a war where there are multiple nuclear powers. We're funding a proxy war with an ally. That's a nuclear power in Ukraine right now. It's incredibly fragile, and Joe Biden is. We don't even understand what he thinks about any of this.
I
Jake
feel
Sullivan.
like I'm going nuts. Like we have $100 billion of the weapons flowing into Ukraine. Our factories can barely keep up there. We've got, by the way, I heard a very telling comment from the Pentagon today at the press briefing, if you listen closely, where they basically quasi-confirmed that they had, quote, doubled the number of assets in the region for Israel. Well, we know the back of the napkin math was 40,000. So are we at 80,000 people who are now in the Middle East? 80,000 people. We have 2 aircraft carriers. We have multiple U.S. Navy destroyers. The USS Cole is one of those that fired today.
China's eager about that.
Well, and so there's a lot. If the geopolitical situation, we have never been more overstretched or less prepared, actually, for 2 massive wars. Even to just be funding, it actually be physically impossible for us to even fund both Israel and Ukraine at the same time, let alone actually have to engage our own people. Another point where I feel extremely black-pilled is just on the uniformity of the American political system. I mean, if you read, I have the Kamala statement in front of me. Iran is a destabilizing, dangerous force in the Middle East. Today's attack on Israel only further demonstrates that. As I have said, I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist militias. My commitment to the security of Israel is unwavering. Let us be clear, Iran is not only a threat to Israel, Iran is a threat to American personnel in the region. Why are they there? Anyone want to say that? American interests and innocent civilians across the region who suffer at the hands of Iran-based and Iran-backed terrorist proxy. That is the and then continuing. We will never hesitate to take whatever action is necessary to defend U.S. forces and interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists. That's a Trump statement. That's a Biden statement.
If you read that statement, I would have no idea what it could be. Almost literally any outside of we could name the few. It's not Rashida Tlaib's.
Thomas Massey.
It's not Rashida Tlaib's statement. It's not Thomas Massey's.
That's about
it's not AOC. You've got a few.
Yeah.
And it
but
really
outside of that, it could literally be any of them.
It's replacement level.
And in the real world, the statement only makes sense if you reverse the countries Iran and Israel. Like who's the destabilizing influence in the region here? This week, Jared Kushner basically,
yes, I saw that.
Did you see this?
Yeah,
he basically said he said what you were saying, just people are saying after the strike. But before the strike, he was saying, now is the moment. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. There's no chance that they missed that in Iran, like as they're sitting around, like wondering, like when and whether they're going to respond. And then Netanyahu does his English language video to the Iranian people, which is like, do you think we're all stupid?
Why don't we play that? We have B4 ready, everybody. Let's go ahead, Eric, if you can, and we'll let us all take a listen.
I speak a lot about the leaders of Iran. Yet at this pivotal moment, I want to address you, the people of Iran. I want to do so directly, without filters, without middlemen. Every day, you see a regime that subjugates you make fiery speeches about defending Lebanon, defending Gaza. Yet every day, that regime plunges our region deeper into darkness and deeper into war. Every day, their puppets are eliminated. Ask Mohammed Deif. Ask Nasrallah. There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There's nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country. With every passing moment, the regime is bringing you, the noble Persian people, closer to the abyss. The vast majority of Iranians know their regime doesn't care a whit about them.
I was just saying, incredible to hear him in one breath say Iran's dragging the region into war, and then in the next breath brag about all of the various bombs that they're dropping. But yeah, no, I mean, this is laying the predicate for regime change.
Right, this was before the Iran strike.
This was before the Iran
Just to be
strike.
clear.
That's exactly right. And it's very similar language to what we heard before Gaza. Our war is not with the people of Gaza, even as they're saying that we're going to treat them like animals, we're going to cut off the food, the water, et cetera, et cetera. Very similar language before they went into Lebanon. And now we see this language as they begin this escalation with Iran.
And if you follow Yunus Tarawi or others who are reporting on Gaza, the slaughter there is just ramping up now. Now that people are wondering, like, okay, what's the Israeli response going to be, and watching the Iranian attack, and they're just unleashing all bloody hell.
Well, and
on
wasn't
what's left of Gaza
hit by some of the missiles today?
I thought that was...
No, it was West
I
Bank.
know West Bank was.
West
Yeah.
Bank.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we just zoom out, right now, Israel is bombing Gaza. They've invaded the West Bank. They're bombing Yemen. They're bombed Syria. They're bombing Lebanon. And they're about to bomb Iran. And it's also really important in all of this not to lose sight of what this all comes back to. I mean, the Israeli officials said it quite plainly to NBC News. The reason they assassinated Nasrallah, the reason they decided to assassinate him now, is because he would not decouple a deal with Israel from a ceasefire in Gaza. The missiles start from Hezbollah after October 7th in, what they see as defense of Gaza. And they have been consistent the whole time. Listen, come to a ceasefire, this all ends. We know that that was true because when there was a ceasefire for a very short period of time, not only from Hezbollah, but from the other Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, they stopped firing missiles. The Houthis stopped doing what they were doing during that period of ceasefire. So all of this could have been avoided.
And could be tomorrow.
If only.
Tonight.
Obviously, Bibi's not going to. If only Joe Biden would say, I'm not shipping you arms. Like, I'm done. I am not sending you the weapons to continue this. And they are wholly dependent on our weapons shipments. Wholly dependent. It could be over tomorrow. And
then we'd have an interesting election on it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Bibi, take it to the American people.
And that's the other thing is, I think we all know Bibi would prefer to have Trump in the White House. I'm beginning to wonder if Joe Biden would prefer to have Trump in the White House because it sure as hell seems like he's laying out the red carpet for him to come in. I mean, not to turn it right to the horse race, but it will be interesting to hear what these two candidates have to say tonight. I imagine they'll be competing over who can be more hawkish.
Yes, but JD...
who can be more aggressive.
Right. JD and Trump have the easier job of... It never would have happened if we were in office. And that's, I saw an interesting, I think he's an Atlantic writer, Tyler Harper, very pro
he's good.
Kamala. And he put out an interesting, just like an observation. He was like, look, for all of us out there, he's like, I think you significantly underestimate this normie, like anti-war sentiment that a lot of people have with Trump. They don't follow the ins and outs and know that, Trump bombed, killed Soleimani or any of that. To them, they're like, well, there wasn't this going on when Trump was president, and now there's a lot of this stuff going on when Biden is president. Kamala, it sounds like she wants to continue the Biden policy. I don't like that. Yeah. And then Biden or Trump and JD can very easily, which the exact statement, the immediate statement from Trump that I saw that came out from the campaign, I don't even think it focused on, Iran made a big mistake. It was like, Iran didn't do this while I was in office. Ukraine would never have happened. Iran never would have happened.
It's
either.
chaos is bad for the incumbent.
Right, but there is an instinct of the sheer simplicity of that observation that I actually do think could be potentially powerful. That is also the danger that we've talked about probably ad nauseum now at this point on the show is like the Kamala just clinging to the Biden policy is both crazy politically and I mean also just strategically as well. Wants to escalate the war in Ukraine, wants to escalate the war with Gaza, wants to basically back an Israeli invasion of Iran. I mean, can we all just sit and appreciate that? Like we are basically co-signing a potential regime change operation in Iran. How did it go last time?
Netanyahu's wanted for decades.
He has wanted this for decades. He said it on You know, he said it on a hot mic. He said it on an open mic. He said it before Congress. This has been his ideological project. Also, we were just talking about how Gaza is getting hit. You know, another thing we're not even talking about? The hostages. Who? The only sympathetic thing that potentially could have constrained his power?
He's stopped
that's long
even
gone.
pretending to care about
They don't
the
care about
hostages.
them anymore. They either kill them or they let them die. They don't care.
They don't care.
You know, the government has never cared.
We've always known that they never cared.
Yeah.
Because from day one, there was a deal on the table, all for all. You release all our hostages, we release all your hostages.
There was also a deal on the table that they've talked about since then. They talked about this with Jeremy in some of his interviews. Within days, they said, look, this was a much bigger operation than we expected it was going to be. We will give you all the civilians if you pledge not to just send ground troops into Gaza. All of them right now. And then from there, you bomb us all you want, and we'll work out a deal for the military, captives that we have for hostages that you have. We'll trade them back and forth.
Yeah.
Like that was it. They put that deal on the table. And
No.
Well,
no.
It's also worth, just thinking about when you have Israelis today hiding in bomb shelters and actual craters in Israeli territory, what that is going to do. Just psychologically to the politics in Israel, what that's going to, how Netanyahu responds to that. Obviously, his political future is important because his actual freedom as a human being is on the line.
Well, they had a very it was either the Israel Twitter account or the IDF Twitter account. They often will do these weird cringe off what is this? So the what is this tweet of theirs today? They wrote in all caps, "This is not normal."
Yeah.
And there's so many layers to that. What do you mean it's not normal? Do you guys not watch your own broadcast? Do you not read your own news? What has your military been doing for 11 straight months if this isn't normal? What they're saying is not normal is that they're shooting back at them. And
hitting it, and actually hitting.
And what they're also saying is that this is not normal for white people. There's something, it's a message that's being sent to the US and Europe. We are your bastion of civilization. We should not have to live through this. These brown people, they're used to this violent environment.
Yeah.
That's normal for them. For us, it's not normal. Times of Israel has an interesting line. They say, the exact locations of such impacts and damage are barred from publication by the IDF censor.
And you should note, clearly, a lot of those videos that were initially put out were taken down. The
Yeah,
most
that's
important
right.
videos that are coming out are those that were filmed in the West Bank or in Gaza.
Yeah.
That's the only reason that we know for sure, and from live TV cameras rolling here in the United States, that there were significant hits. So do not believe the Israelis whenever they say, oh, it was a 100, but whatever bullshit number they put out like they did last time.
Although,
there was damage that was happened tonight. And it happened to military assets 100%.
There was damage in April as well.
Yes,
that has
that's
since
right.
leaked out. But there was complicity that everyone agreed to say, you know what? Let's not admit how much damage there was because that reduces public pressure.
Saves face.
Right.
So, okay, you know what?
Yeah, I almost can get behind that.
Yeah, there was no damage. Yeah.
But that's fine if you want to say
you were
that.
fine.
But
Yeah.
the thing is
we're a news organization, so we're going to have to say that.
it also doesn't appear like they are planning on de-escalating
no.
or using this as an excuse to save face and avoid a retaliatory response whatsoever. So it's just incredibly dark. And basically, this is the latest provocations that we described, the target and assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the attacks on Hezbollah, assassination of Nasrallah. There was also a top IRGC commander who was killed in those strikes as well. Those are just the most recent provocations, but Bibi has been spoiling for this fight the whole time. And the previous strikes in April from Iran, those were closely basically coordinated with the U.S. There was a heads up given through these back channels. The types of, they used, older missiles and drones that could be more easily detected. It was of a different scale. It was intentionally designed, it appears, to save some face, but not really do a lot of significant damage. This is Iran finally somewhat giving Bibi what he wants, because they were faced with the prospect of, okay, so it looks like it doesn't matter whether we attack Israel or not. They're going to attack us. So we can either just sit back and take that, or we can go out and try to do something and try to save some face in advance after these, extraordinary provocations. And so after all of this time, this is Iran basically giving Bibi what he wants that will give him the chips to work with to, get his bigger war and get the U.S. on board and all of this. I was thinking on the way over here, it sort of reminds me of the rope-a-dope strategy that Kamala deployed so effectively against Donald Trump in the last debate. It's also predictable.
It's almost theater.
How many times have we been warning that this is where things, we're smart people, but we're not geniuses.
And we don't have access to Israeli communications.
Internal communication, intelligence and whatever. And it's don't you see what he wants? Don't you see where this is heading? And I don't know what the answer is either they're the dumbest people on earth or they're just incredibly evil. And I'm really not sure.
I'm with you.
Maybe both.
This is a project. This is what they want. This is what Bibi wants. He knows that if they strike Iranian nuclear facility or if they kill the Ayatollah, there is a 100% chance of full-blown U.S. involvement in the war. It's impossible. It's quite literal. So all you have to do is get things to that level.
Yeah.
And now you're not fighting. And then, by the way, those bombs, where do you think they're all coming from? Now when we're in it together, and then the American people, everything. Look, the other thing I've really come to realize is not only are people not following this, but the level of propaganda is wild. So I watched all three networks immediately on Fox. The very first thing you hear is we need regime change. This is all Biden's fault. We need regime change. This is all Biden's fault. We need to have a full-blown war. They didn't have a single guest on that didn't say that. I don't have CNN through the plan or whatever.
I was watching CNN.
Okay, so I'll rely on you two. On MSNBC, it was the same. Even Ehud Omer, the liberal former Israeli PM, regime change. We need regime change in Iran. I'm watching this being look, the boomers who control all of our lives, they believe this shit. They will back a war with Iran. It will be like Iraq. Again, we will need 3 years of the disaster. The boomers will buy it hook, line, and sinker until tens of thousands of Americans and others are either wounded or killed, and then eventually people will be well, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea.
This is potentially so much worse than Iraq. Just today,
it would be worse than Iraq.
Jake Sullivan posted a victory lap about the Biden administration's foreign policy. It was sort of just like how last year Jake Sullivan was talking about how the Middle East has never been this peaceful a week before October 7th. Today, he publishes this long essay in Foreign Affairs about how successful, I'm sorry, this is Blinken, not Jake Sullivan. Yeah, Blinken publishes this long essay in Foreign Affairs about how successful the Biden administration foreign policy has been. One of his points was literally that the relationship between the BRICS countries is superficial. It's not as rooted as a lot of people say it is, and the Biden administration is handling all of this. That is quite a bet to take in a situation like this where you're absolutely right. We are pulled into it no matter what. And we are currently, there's a kinetic war between our ally that we are funding and Russia. I mean, this is insane levels of geopolitical fragility. And A, we don't know where the commander-in-chief is. And B, that should terrify everyone because in recent days, the U.S. has not had a heads up about Nasrallah, the strike. They were not told in advance about the pagers. And I'm whatever you think about that, the point is we are funding this war that has all of these different implications geopolitically. We are supporting this war, backing it on the international stage, and it's basically out of Biden's control.
The other,
not that it's not his fault for how it's escalated, but does anyone have confidence that he's being listened to?
The irony too, I keep thinking about is everyone always said, "Oh, well, we got to fund Ukraine so that China doesn't invade Taiwan." We got to fund Israel so that China doesn't invade Taiwan. If America gets itself involved in 2 ground wars and is bogged down in selling weapons, what do you think the best possible timing to invade Taiwan is?
Well,
if you actually care, when the U.S.
Navy.
Navy is shooting down, spending $100 million in one day, $1 billion in a single day. Last time around, using all of our production facilities, and the only actual country that matters to the United States will actually get taken out. This is the illogic of all of their arguments of there's whole de-escalate through escalation.
Right.
I mean, what a nonsense!
It's going
thing.
really well. That plan's going really well.
Especially with Biden. I mean, we can't we have to linger. He's cooked. His brain is
Yep,
gone.
100%.
Whatever is left there is just like he's just like, I'm a Zionist. It's like that's all we get from it, and we get sleptwalk. Not even know if it's sleptwalk. Like I said, I think it was an evil. These Brett McGurk and other officials behind the scenes very clearly just hijacked the White House and the administration, possibly with his assent or not. Regardless, it's his responsibility.
Absolutely.
He's the president, and this is where we're here. And so, and imagine this: if Biden loses Kamala the election because of an Iran war, how could they politically ever justify it? But if when they get the the explanation afterwards, they wouldn't mention it once. It's like, oh, it wasn't because of Iran; it was something else. That's why she lost.
You were talking about the news coverage, and I was watching CNN. Reminded me why I don't watch CNN.
Got a good dose of Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer.
It's just, I know I'm Pollyannish, I guess, about this, but I think human lives matter. I think human lives, whether they're Israeli or Lebanese or Palestinian, I think they should all matter, and we should care about them as equally as we can. And 1,000 Lebanese people were slaughtered last week, and they didn't care at all. Not at all. I tweeted this, and it's true. I literally saw more care and concern for inanimate objects in Tel Aviv today than I saw for a single slaughtered Lebanese person, let alone the God only knows how many Palestinians have been killed at this point. And, I know people feel like this is all very far away right now, but I said this to you, Emily, when we were co-hosting on Monday, we're at a tipping point in terms of the international order. It's the era of the U.S. sole superpower and the post-World War II concept. It's gone. It's gone. What's happening right now is authoring the rules of the road going forward. And right now, those rules of the road look like if you have the bombs, you can blow up schools, UN aid agencies, embassies. You can drop 85 bombs on residential buildings to get one dude. Compare that to what we did with bin Laden. Not to say we're perfect, but compare that to what we did with bin Laden. We're authoring
Today we would just bomb that entire town.
Yeah. We're authoring a new order where, hey, if you can infiltrate a civilian supply chain and booby trap walkie-talkies or cell phones or laptop computers and harm your adversary, hey, go do it. But if you want to invade your next door neighbor and create a quote-unquote buffer zone, hey, go ahead. You got the arms, you got the weapons, go ahead. It's your right. That's the world that we are authoring right now. Because which of our, what credibility would we have to complain about it going forward? When we're not just tacitly agreeing to it, we're encouraging it. We're shipping the bombs. We're providing the cover. Our politicians are going out and saying this is right and good and it was a measure of justice. That's the world we're all going to have to live in that is being authored right now in this moment.
And doing it under the pretense of the rules-based international order, right? That's what's so wild about the way that the U.S. has approached this conflict, actually for years, not just since October 7th, wielding the so-called rules-based international order as a cudgel against other countries, while then also sort of turning a blind eye to it. And it's that inconsistency that if you care, let's just say you're an America First realist, let's say you're Team MAGA. Not exactly Team MAGA, but
America First realist.
America First realist. But this is actually, I'm not going to speak for you, but this is actually kind of your perspective that you completely destroy the credibility of your.
Well, the credibility was destroyed the day that we invaded Iraq. But okay, let's move past that.
But that's the thing. Yes.
What drives me crazy is when I have to hear about Russia struck a single Ukrainian apartment building, and then at the same time I watch the Nasrallah apartment building get blown apart and I'm like, why should I care exactly? We're okay with it here and we're not here.
That's right.
And so one is noble, the other is fine.
So
Which is it? Which one is it? And it's that's the maddening part of it. You're also very correct. I really want to echo what you said. You think America doesn't have the capability to infiltrate a supply chain and blow people up? Yeah, we do. Do you think that we don't have the capability to level bin Laden? We could have wiped Abbottabad off the map, the entire city of however many people.
Their Army Academy.
We
nuked.
don't do it and didn't do it for a reason, which is we're like, well, if you do this, we're opening up a whole can of worms and all that. And, if you are, what did Russia want to do in Ukraine? They wanted to denazify. I mean, look at the language from Naftali Bennett and others about the Iranians. I believe Bibi called them Nazis. And it's like, okay, well, we're normalizing the rhetoric here, and then we're, saying that the rhetoric over here is so horrible. Well, which one is it? And people in India, they see the difference. People in Brazil, they see the difference. The rising global powers see it completely differently than the way that we do. Yeah. And rogue nations all over the world can look at Israel like Russia looking at Israel. Wow, they will laugh in our face whenever they say that they want to keep 20% of Ukraine, and we say that that's somehow some threat to democracy. Look at the Armenia-Azerbaijan situation. A lot of people have moved past that. That was not only used with Israeli weapons, but the pretext of a lot of it was, well, now is the right time to resolve all of these questions. Right. So we have created this deeply unstable international system of which we no longer have the crutch of even the rhetoric of the rules-based international order. And it does, and this is the other key, it makes America not only less safe because we're tied to this, but the global system is designed for the American way of life. Like, look at these bombings in Yemen. This with the Houthis and all those strikes, as we're about to talk about with the ports, these people have tremendous impact over all of our lives. The so-called rules-based international order was just a pretext for the American empire to make stuff cheap. I actually kind of support that. But my point, as long as we're all being honest about what it is. But that's going to go away. And now we're all going to see what the reality of taking that away and enabling these types of things are. And that actually terrifies me more than anything, because America is already broke at where things are right now. Imagine 25, 35, 40, 50, 60% inflation. We're living in another world. I mean, literally in another world. And our entire economic system is built on cheap capital, cheap goods, and debt. And so when you start to then turn around, increase military GDP, and we might have to have a draft, like God knows what. And this is not far-fetched if we get into a war with Iran. Iraq broke us.
Yeah. I also just want to mention, I can't imagine being in the shoes of someone who's in near Asheville, North Carolina, and has just had their entire life destroyed and flooded, and still no cell and no food and whatever, and it's like, oh, and here we go with another fucking war. Or anyone anywhere in the country was like, struggling and would like the priorities to be, because we did not vote for this. We voted for the opposite of this many times, right? You look at the polling on conditioning aid to Israel and continuing to ship weapons to Israel. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. But the lockstep consensus out of Washington leaves none of us with any doubt, no matter what happens in this election, where this is all headed.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.